off of Mary. It was obvious her pulse had quickened as the agitation seemed to take hold. I took a calculated risk with her. "Mary," I said gently, "there were no children in the house yesterday." Her response was immediate and extreme. She sat bolt upright and screamed at me, her neck muscles straining.
"Tell me what you've done with my children. Answer me this instant. Where are my kids? Where are my kids?"
Steps sounded on the floor behind me, and I stood up so I could be the first one to reach her. She was raving now, screaming over and over.
"Tell me! Why won't you tell me?"
Now she had started to sob, and I felt sorry for her. I slowly walked around the table. "Mary!" I shouted her name, but she was completely unresponsive to the sound of my voice, even to my movement toward her.
"Tell me where my kids are! Tell me! Tell me! Tell me this instant!"
"Mary!" I leaned over and took her by the shoulders as gently as I could under the circumstances.
"Tell me!"
"Mary, look at me, please." That's when she went for my gun. Chapter 97. She must have seen the holster tucked inside my jacket. In a split second, she reached up and her hand was on the butt of my Glock. "No!" I yelled. "Mary!" I instinctively knocked her back into her chair, but the gun wrenched free from the holster and she had it. I caught a flash of her eyes, which were glazed and crazy. I dove at her, grabbing her wrist with one hand and the gun with the other. I continued to yell her name. Next, the two of us fell over the chair as it went down with a loud crack. I was vaguely aware of people scrambling all around us. My focus stayed on her. She strained, red-faced, slamming my side with her free fist. I now had a knee on her chest and one hand still on her wrist, pinning the gun to the ground, but she was as strong as she looked. And her finger was already wrapped around the Glock's trigger. She squirmed hard, turning the barrel of the gun toward herself and tilting her head to meet it. She knew exactly what she was doing. "No! Mary!" With a rush of adrenaline, fighting an equal surge or resistance from her, I managed to lift her gun hand toward the ceiling. Then I smashed it back down very hard against the floor. The Glock fired once into the wall of the interrogation room, even as it fell out of her grasp. I snatched it up, the shot still ringing in my ears, the side of my face numb. There was a brief, suspended moment of near silence. Mary stopped struggling immediately, and then, in an unbelievable echo of the previous day's events, the police descended on her like a small army. They picked her up as she flailed once again, arms and legs whipping crazily. I could hear her unchecked sobs as they carried her away.
"My babies! My babies! My poor babies! Where are my children? Oh, where? Oh, where? What have you done with my children?"
Her voice receded down the hall until a heavy door slammed with great finality, and she was gone. Not surprisingly, I didn't get the chance for another interview. To make matters worse, if that was possible, I saw James Truscott as I left the building about an hour later. He was among the throng of reporters gathered outside waiting for any tidbit of news. He yelled at me, "How did you get your gun, Dr. Cross? How'd that happen?" Somehow, Truscott had already gotten the story. Chapter 98. I could only wonder about the causes and the full extent of Mary Wagner's mental illness, and the obvious torment and stress it was putting on her. There certainly hadn't been any time for a meaningful psych evaluation, and my part in the investigation was coming to an end now, whether I liked it or not. And to be honest, I had mixed feelings. By early that afternoon, Mary's state of mind was a moot point, LAPD's search of her house had turned up a holy trinity of evidence. A Walther PPK discovered under a blanket in her attic crawl space had already shown a preliminary ballistic match to the weapon used in murders. CSI had also found half a dozen sheets of children's stickers, and most significant, stolen family photographs from Marty Lowenstein Bell's office and Susie Cartulis's purse. Both Michael Bell and Giovanni Cartulis had positively identified the photos as having belonged to their murdered wives. And best of all, most important anyway, Fred Van Allsburg told the small group of agents assembled in his office, 12 o'clock came and went today without incident. No new victim, no new email. It's over. I think I can safely say that. The mood was grimly congratulatory. Just about everyone was glad to leave this one behind, but the details of the case would haunt most of the team for some time, just as the D.C. sniper case still lingered in the J. Edgar Hoover building back east. It's an unsatisfying and unpleasant feeling, but also part of what drives us to do better. Alex, we owe you one on this. Van Allsburg finally came over to me. Your work on the case was invaluable. I have to say that. I see why Ron Burns likes you close to home. A few uneasy laughs went through the room. Agent Page reached from behind and patted my shoulder. He would go far in the Bureau if he could keep his passion for solving crimes. I'd still like to take a peek at that final evidence LAPD found, and maybe get a real interview with Mary Wagner, I said, diverting back to what I thought was most important. Van Allsburg shook his head. Not necessary. There's no reason for me not to stick around another day, I started to say. Don't worry about it. Page and Fujishiro are good for the details. I can back them up. And if we really need you again, there's always frequent flyer miles, right? His tone was artificially bright. Fred, Mary Wagner wouldn't talk to anyone before I came. She trusts me. At least she did, he said. Probably not anymore. It was a blunt statement, but not aggressive. I'm still the only person she's opened up to. I hear LAPD is getting nowhere with her. Like I said, you're just a plane ride away if we need you back. I spoke about it with Director Burns and he agrees. Go home to your family. You have kids, right? Yes, I have kids. Hours later, packing my bag at the hotel, I was struck hard with another kind of realization. Actually, I couldn't wait to get home. It was a huge relief that I'd be back in D.C. again, with no immediate travel plans. But, and the but was important, why had that fact been so far from my mind in Van Allsburg's office? What were these blinders I wore, and how did I keep forgetting I had them on? What kind of dramatic wake-up call did I need before I got the message? On the way to the airport, I figured out another piece. It just hit me. The A's and B's on the children's stickers at the crime scenes. I knew what the letters meant. Mary's imaginary children's names. Ashley, Adam, Brendan. 2 A's and a B. I phoned it in on my way out of L.A. Part 5. End of story. Chapter 99.
The storyteller was done killing. Fini. It was over. And no one would ever know the whole truth about what had happened. End of story. So he threw himself a party with some of his best buddies from Beverly Hills. He told them he'd just gotten a gig writing a screenplay for an A-list director, a big dopey thriller based on a dopey bestseller. He'd been given license to change anything he didn't like, but that was all he could say about it right now. The director was paranoid, so what's new? But a big party was definitely in order. His friends thought they understood what was going down, which gave him some idea how little they knew him. His best friends in the world, and hell, none of them knew him at all. None of them suspected he could be a killer. How frickin' unbelievably crazy was that? No one knew him. The party was at the Snake Pit Ale House, a bar on Melrose where they'd held a fantasy football league during his early days in L.A., soon after he'd arrived from Brown University to act and maybe dabble at writing scripts. Serious worthy stuff, not box office crap. "The order of the night is free beer," he said as each of his buds arrived at the bar. "And wine for the wussies among you. So, I guess it's vino all around?" Nobody drank wine. Not one of the 14 pals who came to the bash. They were all glad to see him out and about. And also about his new gig. Though some of the more honest ones admitted they were jealous. Everybody started calling him A-list. He and David and John Boy and Frankie were still at the bar when it closed at a little past 2. They were overanalyzing a movie called We Don't Live Here Anymore. They finally more or less stumbled outside and exchanged Hollywood hugs on the street next to Johnny's fucking Bentley. Talk about A-list. The spoils of the last movie he'd produced. A $400 million grosser worldwide, which made all the rest of them sick, because all he'd done was buy a dipshit graphic novel for $50,000, then sign up The Rock for $10 million. Genius, right? Yep, 'cause it worked. "Love you, man. You're the best, you sick, obnoxious, ostentatious bastard. You too, Davy," he yelled as the silver Bentley pulled away from the curb and sped west. "I know I'm just a bastard right now," David yelled back. "But I have dreams of being sick, obnoxious, and ostentatious too, and talented, which is what's holding me back in this town." "Hey man, I hear ya. I feel ya," he yelled. "See ya, A-list, ya hack." "I'm just a storyteller," he yelled back. Then he was kind of floating down a side street to his own car, a 7-year-old Beamer, not a Suburban. He was definitely 3 sheets to the wind, happy as a pig out of a blanket, humming Jimi Hendrix's The Wind Cries Mary, an in-joke that only he would get. Until suddenly he began to sob, and he couldn't make himself stop. Not even when he was sitting on the lawn of some grungy apartment building with his head down between his legs, bawling like a baby. And he was thinking, just one more, just one. One more kill and I'll be good.
Chapter 100.
The next morning he couldn't sleep, and he drove up and down Melrose, past L'Angelo, which used to be Emilio's, the Groundling Theater, where Phil Hartman got his start, Tommy Tang's, the original Johnny Rockets, the Blue Whale. His city, man. His and Proud Mary's. It was around 5:30 or so when he bounced into the Starbucks on Melrose, which used to be the burger that ate L.A. back in the day. Man, he did not like Starbucks. But they were open, the greedy little yuppie bastards. The numbers dictated that they be open, right? The numbers ran everything these days. And here he was, proving the number crunchers right. 5:30 in the a.m., and he was already making their day. God, he despised these dipshit coffee places. The new McDonald's, overpriced rip-offs. He remembered when a cup of coffee was 50 cents, which seemed about right. But Sumatra blend, now that was worth $2.50 if it was worth a nickel. For a tall, which really meant a small. And the goateed schmo minding the store was too busy setting up shop to give any attention to his paying customer, his early bird, the day's first sucker. He let it go for a minute or so, but the jerk was starting to piss him off royally. "Be right back," he finally told the super-busy barista behind the counter, and the guy still hardly noticed him. What an ass and a half. No doubt an actor out of work, too good for the job, right? With an attitude, which was supposed to be a good thing these days. A minute later he re-entered the Starbucks with a piece in his jacket pocket. He was starting to rev up now. This was probably stupid. Definitely not too smart, but God, it felt pretty good. Hey, pal.